Hey again, welcome back to Daily Dose of Anime Recaps. In this video, we'll be covering episodes 1 through 10 of the series Moriarty the Patriot. Does the name Sherlock Holmes ring a bell? If so, this series portraying the youth of the ingenious Moriarty will definitely make you enjoy yourself to no end. William James Moriarty was Sherlock Holmes's arch-nemesis after all. Yep, it's the same dude whose crafty plots gave even the infamous detective Sherlock Holmes tons of headaches on plentiful occasions previously. Long story short, William grew up to loathe the lofty aristocrats of the late 19th century Britain. Goes without saying, the boy had plenty of reasons to hate those nobles' guts. In such a cutthroat world, it was next to impossible for any commoner to live with dignity or to ascend the ladder of success and attain a higher status. Anyways, William took it upon himself to alter the cruel reality and raise the unfair aristocratic society to ground by whatever means necessary. To accomplish his mission, the insane dude even went so far as to drown London in rivers of blood, turning it into a living hell and having himself hailed as the king of crime. What follows is the tale of William's journey down the lane of loose morals, as well as the sparks raised in his clash against Sherlock, the legendary detective. Episode 1. In the initial scene, we witness a young lad making a run for it while being chased by a despicable foe. Unfortunately, said boy trips over while moving his legs fast and is thus captured by his stalker. Needless to say, things don't end well for the poor boy, as news of his miserable death makes it to the front page the next morning. The series' protagonist, William James Moriarty, takes a liking to the kidnapping case. Meanwhile, the criminal at hand seems to have an unusual fetish of slaughtering young boys after tons of brutal torture. With the cops feeling clueless, it's none other than the strongly observative William who's able to draw conclusions just beyond reading a flimsy news article. According to William's logic, the criminal at hand happens to be an aristocrat, since all of the abducted boys' fathers used to hold regular contact with any number of noblemen. What's more, it's far from unusual for teenage boys to lend their fathers a helping hand in their workshops. That said, the kidnapper must have crossed paths with his victims in the aforementioned workplaces. Why hunt for prey aimlessly on the streets when there's plenty of sheep available in plain sight? There's one thing that puzzles William's younger brother Lewis. Thing is, one of the abducted boys happens to be a street orphan, unlike the other victims whose fathers used to own jewelry stores, stables, etc. William deems the orphan boy as the crux of the matter and heads out to investigate his backstory. In the meantime, William's adoptive elder brother Albert Moriarty pays a visit and expresses his condolences to Eden, the tailor. Said tailor's son happens to be one of the 7 hapless boys butchered ruthlessly by the kidnapper not long ago. Albert's heart aches at the sight of Eden's grief-stricken eyes, and so he vows to lend Eden a helping hand in claiming his revenge. Far away, William confronts a concertina-playing lad, one who used to be an acquaintance of the orphan previously kidnapped and killed. Once again, the sharp-sighted William's guess hits the mark, and so he learns that the concertina doesn't belong to this kid. That's right. In fact, the instrument used to be Cass's property, the same orphan kid. After Cass's death, this dude inherited his deceased friend's business and started playing concertina across the street. That said, William confirms the unlucky spot where Cass used to play concertina to make a living when alive. Upon investigating, William learns that a particular window from the luxurious Gastro's Club had a clear view of the spot where Cass used to perform previously. Upon visiting the club, William bumps into Earl Argleton, one of the club's founding members, as well as somebody who fancies sitting next to the aforementioned window. Same as 2 + 2 = 4, William correctly guesses Argleton to be the same wretched kidnapper who's been at large lately, butchering innocent boys. Going forwards, William confidently comments about Argleton's suit having been tailored by Eden, his jewelry being a product of Goldstein Jewelers, the watch being handcrafted by our master's clocksmith, and finally, the hat being from Morgan Brothers Company. Heck, he even figures out how Argleton's horses must be sheltered at Shannon Racing Club stables. What's funny is that the kids of all the above-mentioned shops owners happen to be the 7 kidnapping victims after all. Finally, William points out how Argleton must be a fan of young boys. On the flip side, Argleton, who had initially been pleasantly surprised at William's accurate guessing abilities, now starts sweating in fear. The guy soon excuses himself and slips away in a hurry. Afterwards, William realizes that there's someone tailing him. Obviously, the guy happens to be Argleton's lackey and has been tasked with disposing of William forever. Things don't go as planned, though, as William instead corners his stalker in a dead-end street. Lewis then jumps out of the blue and places a knife next to the man's neck. With his life at stake, the man's tongue moves like magic, and poor Argleton ends up tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. William then serves as Eden's crime consultant, since the tailor had been seething with his lust for revenge ever since his kid got annihilated in a merciless fashion. In the end, William enjoys his cigarette outside, while the aggrieved Eden has his fun with his son's killer. Episode 2. Days later, Albert is seen recalling the past, where he used to abhor the unfair aristocratic society, despite being a noble himself. By a stroke of luck, he bumped into both William and Lewis, who used to live at some downtrodden orphanage back then. Albert was thoroughly won over by William's ingenuity and wisdom. After all, an orphan kid being a math prodigy as well as retaining tons of other knowledge was simply unheard of. Sometime later, Albert's lecherous father, Earl Moriarty, promises to adopt an orphan out of desire to impress a charitable lady. Also, he couldn't afford to look bad in front of his fellow nobles, could he? In the end, Earl Moriarty assigns Albert with the task of seeking out a foster brother. For that very purpose, Albert pays a visit to the orphanage yet again. Once there, he overhears William mentioning something about digging 40 yards while chatting with a group of commoners. Later that week, he hears news of a nobility safe having been plundered. Albert is left astounded after learning how the thieves dug a 40-yard tunnel to aid their agenda of robbery. Surely it couldn't be a coincidence, could it? Hence, Albert rushes to the orphanage yet again in order to confront William head-on and get to the crux of the matter. Once there, he witnesses William instigating fellow kids to annihilate them should they ever cross paths with bad nobles. This and the incident where William aided in ransacking a noble's safe both serve as proof of William's hatred for the aristocrats. Not being too fond of the ruling class himself, Albert questions whether William has the guts to oppose the entire world. After all, the ruling class, which represents only 3% of the population, is the one that pulls the strings behind almost everything. Opposing them equals declaring war against the entire world. The courageous William then and there declares how waging a war against the whole world is exactly what he intends to do. Only doing so will help him achieve his dream of altering the present cruel reality and transforming this world into a utopia. Once again, Albert is thoroughly won over by William's charisma, and the two start envisioning a far more glorious world together. That's about how William and Lewis end up as Albert's adoptive brothers, and start living together with him in the Moriarty estate. Episode 3. Albert's mother isn't too impressed by her husband's wish to adopt an orphan, especially since the teacher did so to impress another lady. As far as she's concerned, adopting anybody is out of the question, not to mention adopting two filthy kids at once. Lewis being seriously ill doesn't help matters either. The couple bickers non-stop, but the result doesn't prove fruitful for Mrs. Moriarty. After all, won't going back on his word make Earl Moriarty look like a degenerate in front of his fellow nobles? In the end, not only does Earl Moriarty give his consent to adopting two foster kids, he even goes so far as to pay for Lewis's operation. Days later, Albert's younger blood brother makes an entrance. The cruel fellow is also named William, but let's call him Will for the sake of avoiding confusion, okay? Anyhow, Will decides to let Louis experience what it feels like to be tortured and oppressed one random day. First, he prompts the ill fellow to prepare a cup of tea. Later, he willfully spills the cup of tea without even sipping from it once. Finally, the shameless dude blames Lewis for the mishap and wishes to make him pay for it. As for the punishment, it's simply to stab himself with a fork. Just then, William steps forward in order to cover for his sickly younger brother. The crazy kid grabs the fork and pierces his own freaking hand with it. The act astonishes Will, making him speechless for the moment. Even so, still, the sadistic dude remains unimpressed. Later that night, he sneaks into William and Lewis's room and attempts to place some silverware. Obviously, the guy had ill intentions and plans to slander his foster brothers as thieves. Instead of that happening, William and Lewis corner Will together with none other than Albert, Will's elder brother. Having become fed up with his despicable family members, Albert finally finds his resolve and resorts to drastic measures as a result. The guy literally stabs his younger blood brother to death. Later, the trio proceeds to incinerate the entire estate by means of a careful plan devised by the ingenious William. Lewis even burns his cheek to make their story appear more credible in front of others, as well as to avoid suspicion. After the incident, William, Lewis, and Albert are whatever's left of the Moriarty family. In the meantime, Albert recalls his promise to William the day he offered to adopt both those brothers. Simply put, he swore an oath to utilize his social standing as well as all resources available to him to help turn William's dream of a resplendent world into reality. Episode 4. Back to the present, we witness an ideal example representing the unfairness and cruelty of the aristocratic society. Simply put, a lofty viscount who goes by the name Belfour declines his gardener named Burton's request for aid. The story goes like this. Burton's little kid gets ill and the situation seems critical. Out of misfortune, the village doctor had run off to his daughter's wedding earlier. That said, Burton starts pleading with his employer to let his private doctor treat his child. Unfortunately, Belfour ruthlessly declines all of Burton's pleas and even threatens to deprive Burton of his job should he insist any further. The heartless fellow then closes his door in a merciless fashion. As a result, Burton, as well as his wife, Michelle's only son, passes away in a tragedy. Sometime later, William shifts to the same locality as Viscount Belfour and is appointed as a math teacher in the nearby university. An old lady informs him of the tragedy that befell Burton's family not too long ago, and how Belfour throttled his gardener's son to death in an indirect manner. At their new residence, Lewis informs William of a lunch invitation by none other than Belfour himself. William willingly accepts and pays a visit to the Viscount together with his brothers, Lewis and Albert. At the food table, Belfour explains how he's been suffering from heart issues for a while. What's more, he's been resorting to quinine, a medicine originally meant for malaria, but one which is also effective against heart diseases. Furthermore, Belfour happens to be quite fond of collecting rare plants, and has also been growing cinchona, the plant from which quinine is derived, in his back garden. While strolling around, William witnesses Burton playing his role as a gardener and tending to various plants in Belfour's place. Later at the pub, he bumps into Burton and expresses his condolences regarding his son's death, as well as his wife Michelle's deteriorating mental state. Burton snaps at William due to having his emotional wounds torn open. He regains his cool soon enough and starts to stress over Michelle's condition. Apparently, she hates him for being an incompetent, good-for-nothing fellow ever since he failed to help his son survive. William agrees with Michelle's viewpoint, since Burton did choose to do nothing after all. He then claims how it's still not too late to take action and prove his worth. The gardener grasps the meaning behind William's words and instantly starts seething with his desire for revenge. William finally offers his services as a crime consultant to Burton for free. The next evening, the Moriarty brothers yet again visit Belfour at his manor. Then, while having lunch, William casually suggests Belfour to indulge himself with grapefruit juice, since it holds a rather delicious flavor. Seeing no harm in doing so, Belfour pays heed to William's suggestion and tasks Burton with squeezing juice out of grapefruits from his garden. Just then, Michelle loses her cool, and with the kitchen knife used to peel grapefruits, she makes a sudden attempt at Belfour's life. Burton and the Moriarty brothers intervene in time, though, and prevent Michelle from murdering the Viscount. Nonetheless, the near-death experience forces a sudden heartache upon Belfour. The Viscount then consumes his dosage of quinine together with the grapefruit juice prepared by the gardening couple. All this while, he continues shouting curses at Belfour and his insane woman, and even sacks Burton from his job. Just then, Belfour suffers from an instant drop in blood pressure. William cheerfully explains how grapefruit reacts badly with quinine. That said, the whole part about Michelle freaking out and Burton serving grapefruit juice to calm down Belfour has been part of William's scheme all along. As a result, Belfour breathes his last, while being reminded of the atrocities he committed towards the commoners previously. Episode 5. Days later, a homeless dude witnesses a young maiden named Frida climb across the bridge and drown by plunging herself into the river. At the university, William grows concerned regarding a student named Lucien. Said kid has been bunking his classes for 3 days straight. Although Lucien's best friend Tate makes an excuse about Lucien being ill, the kid has a long way to go before being able to fool William. Hence, William pays a surprise visit to Lucien and Tate's shared dorm room not long after. Noticing how Lucien's bed hasn't been slept in for days, William compels Tate to spill the beans ASAP. Turns out Lucien snuck out of the hostel 3 days ago and hasn't been back ever since. As his friend, Tate naturally thought to cover for his goofy friend, but even he admits how the situation has grown beyond the scope of what he can handle. William further learns how Lucien had fallen head over heels over a pub waitress named Frida lately. Sadly though, Frida was discovered dead after having drowned not long ago. Just as he steps outside the dormitories, William is approached by Dudley, the university's administrator. Dudley grows curious about whether there's something amiss with any of the students. William then elaborates Lucian's situation in detail and wonders whether he should inform the police. Long story short, Dudley promises to use his influence with the local police to look into matters discreetly. At the same time, the suspicious dude nudges William to pull back, wishing to resolve the mystery himself. Obviously, William pays no heed to Dudley's BS and continues investigating. He starts by paying a visit to the pub where Frida used to work at. The woman in charge there reveals how poor Frida died after drowning in the river not long ago. Before that, she too had been smitten by Lucian and even became pregnant with his child. Later on, Lucian proposed to her despite him being a nobleman, while Frida was but a mere commoner. However, only days later, Dudley approached Frida and revealed some news to her in private. From the way Frida broke down, the woman guessed that she had indeed been dumped by her lover. Even so, then the courageous girl sought to continue living cheerfully and even raise the child on her own. Back in the present, Dudley pays Lucian a visit in some dark room. The teenager seems to be out of his senses, as if drugged, and is told by Dudley to stay put until his emotional wounds heal. Afterwards, William invites his two friends named Fred and Sebastian to help with the investigation. Fred manages to locate Lucian immediately upon arrival and confirms how the kid had been drugged heavily by his captor. Later on, Lucian regains consciousness near the bridge where Frida died. Dudley rushes to the place soon after and becomes flabbergasted upon seeing Lucian out and about. Apparently, he had received a letter from Lucian, who seemed hell-bent upon exposing all of Dudley's deeds so far. Feeling anxious, Dudley starts babbling about how he did so for the sake of Lucian himself. The guy admits to having lied to Frida about Lucian abandoning her. What's more, he's the one who drugged her with huge amounts of opium, resulting in her having fallen off the bridge. Finally, Dudley starts screaming about how it was a mistake on Lucian's part to go planning babies with a woman of lower status. Evidently, Dudley indirectly killed poor Lucian's love of life solely because of the difference in their social status. Wow, the guy does have a knack for meddling in other people's business. William then promises to let Dudley have a taste of his own medicine by forcing the guy to dance himself to death. Just then, Sebastian starts shooting bullets near Dudley's footing. The wretched dude is forced to avoid those bullets in an awkward manner that resembles a dance pattern after all, just as William promised. While he's busy dancing, Dudley trips over the bridge and falls to his death in the same way his victim Frida did. Afterwards, William and his henchmen are seen keeping watch over Lucian, who's currently busy placing flowers upon the new tombstone he erected for Frida not long ago. Episode 6. Next up, we witness an aristocrat who goes by the name Enders hunt down and exterminate a poor commoner in his hunting grounds. Later on, Enders embarks on a sea voyage by reserving a spot on a luxury cruise liner. Upon reaching the ship, Enders is disgusted after witnessing the place teeming with filthy commoners. The rude fella immediately starts foul-mouthing the commoners around while praising himself as a chosen one, someone who's bound to live a privileged life as a nobleman. Just then, Fred approaches Enders and engages him in small talk. He reveals how the ship has reserved spots for 3 classes, one being reserved for the lowly commoners. This further displeases Enders, as onboarding the same ship as low-class animals was truly beneath his status. Anyway, Fred later reports to William about how Enders, who happens to be their current target, has gone aboard the ship. We then witness a flashback where William is seen explaining to his fellow comrades about his agenda to turn London into a living hell. He points out how it's next to impossible to overthrow the current class system in an immediate fashion. Same can't be said for human minds, though, which are alterable quite readily, especially when death and tons of propaganda serve as catalysts. All his party needs to do is to manipulate certain events from behind the scenes and leverage the deaths of certain people to further their agenda. While Enders is busy climbing the stairs, a rude commoner named Thomas starts cursing him for breaking the line and boarding ahead of others. Turns out, Moriarty's group had paid Thomas in advance just to have him annoy Enders to no end. Being a small-time crook who indulges in both rape and robbery, none could have proven as a better pawn than him. Afterwards, Fred fakes the delivery of unfortunate news to Enders. Apparently, his estate had burned down for reasons unknown. Being on a cruise liner, the distressed Enders obviously has no way to confirm the matter's authenticity. In the meantime, William bumps into Sherlock for the first time ever while on the ship. The detective is currently busy playing a guessing game together with a bunch of ladies. From the looks of it, he had correctly guessed the occupations of nearly a dozen men before. Then, as expected, Sherlock yet again correctly surmises the line of work of another stranger, the target being none other than William himself, this time around. Simply put, Sherlock points out how William happens to be a mathematician, after drawing simple deductions based on logical conclusions, as well as his insane conservative abilities. William is quite impressed by Sherlock's capability, but at the same time he feels a sense of competence. As a result, the guy then declares how it's his turn to guess. First of all, William points out how Sherlock is adept at playing guitar, but he ain't a musician. Furthermore, he's a pro when it comes to both martial arts, while having also a knack for scientific experiments. It's Sherlock's turn to be left astounded this time around. He then bursts out laughing after William steals his quote by declaring how he guessed correctly by means of simple deduction and observation. Back to Enders. The guy finally loses his cool thanks to William's careful scheming. In the end, he tosses aside his last shred of sanity and decides to convert the ship into his precious hunting grounds. Who else could serve as a more ideal victim other than Thomas, the wretched commoner who has been pestering him non-stop lately? Enders thus invites Thomas to his room and pretends to be apologetic for his past misbehavior. The petty thief, who hasn't got the slightest clue as to what's really happening, soon gets stabbed into the heart and is killed in such a ruthless fashion. With everything going according to plan, William barges into Enders' room unannounced and discovers him holding a knife next to Thomas's corpse there. Episode 7. Having been busted, Enders starts blabbering excuses such as Thomas being a thief, etc. William, however, points out that the room's far too spotless after having been ransacked. Furthermore, the murder knife appears to be quite expensive and couldn't possibly belong to a petty commoner such as Thomas. However, William chooses to believe in and help Enders despite all the clues pointing against him. They're both fellow nobles after all. In the end, William suggests shoving away the corpse into the river. Since there had been no other eyewitnesses, Enders' ordeal would end then and there. Unbeknownst to him, both Fred and Sebastian fish out Thomas's corpse in secret almost immediately after the throw. On the following day, William makes an entrance while Enders is busy enjoying the ballet. He questions whether Enders annihilated Thomas for certain. Enders becomes baffled by this out-of-the-blue question. That is, until William points at Thomas, who's currently seated some distance away, enjoying the show along with the others. The now panicked Enders loses his calm after making it to Thomas's spot and finding the man no longer there. As if becoming a bloodhound, Enders starts chasing after Fred, currently disguised as the deceased Thomas. The bloodthirsty noble finally reaches a deserted corner where he discovers Thomas's body lying in a corner. Not in his right state of mind, Enders starts plunging his dagger into Thomas constantly, as if afraid the latter would rise up as an undead yet again. All this while, he fails to acknowledge his surroundings as a platform, one which is raised onto the next floor upon William's signal. What awaits Enders is an auditorium filled to the brim with people, all who bear witness to his mad frenzy as he continues stabbing the already dead Thomas in a never-ending manner. Soon, someone among the audience recognizes Enders. Another declares how rumors about Enders' fetish for kidnapping commoners and hunting him in his private grounds must be true after all. By now, Enders had already lost the last shred of his sanity, and so he starts yelling about commoners being mere livestock. That said, killing any number of them is absolutely fine as far as he's concerned. The guy soon makes a run for it once the guards arrive. Having nowhere else to run, the idiotic fool climbs on top of the ship's mast, feeling certain that none dare follow him. Unfortunately, there's no need to tail behind him, as soon enough, Sebastian's silent gun forces Enders to lose his balance and fall to his death. The previously mighty noble glances at William's creepy smile for the last time and realizes, too late, how it was his comrade all along, the one who conspired against him. In the aftermath, William comments about Sherlock Holmes being a hidden threat. Turns out the detective had inspected Thomas's corpse back on the ship and realized how he got killed at least 10 to 15 hours ago. But if that's true, then why did Enders admit to having assassinated the poor commoner in the first place? The answer, according to his skills of deduction, lies in there being a third party involved. Someone who tricked Enders into believing that Thomas was still alive and kicking. In such a way, he orchestrated such a moving performance in front of the massive audience. Unfortunately, though, even Sherlock felt out of his league in this situation and wasn't able to ascertain who the criminal mastermind truly was. Episode 8. One random day, Sherlock's landlady, Miss Hudson, starts pestering him just when he's about to head out. To resolve the dilemma, Sherlock's buddy, Stamford, suggests finding himself a roommate. That way the two can split the rent, making it easier for both Sherlock and Miss Hudson to live by after all. After a couple of terrible interviews, Sherlock finally lands himself a decent roommate. The guy, whose name is John Watson, happens to be a field doctor and has just come back after participating in the Afghan War. In their first meetup, John is won over by Sherlock's exemplary observation skills, after the latter correctly guesses John's occupation as well as a couple of other things. That evening, just when Sherlock and John are spending some chill time at the club together with Miss Hudson, Inspector Lestrade arrives. The grim inspector cuts to the chase right away, explaining how an aristocrat named Drebber got assassinated at about 10 p.m. that night. Before taking his last breath, the victim wrote Sherlock's name next to himself by utilizing his overflowing blood. What's more, both the footprints as well as the model of the gun are exact replicas of Sherlock's own possessions. Left with no other choice, Lestrade regretfully arrests Sherlock, whom he often collaborates with to resolve mysterious cases. However, Sherlock denies the accusations against himself and claims how his gun is a newly bought one and hasn't even been fired once yet, a fact that's verifiable quite easily. Sherlock then asks Lestrade for a favor as he wishes to investigate the crime scene himself. Lestrade agrees, and as a result, Sherlock ends up sniffing around Drebber's mansion. Lestrade then goes on to enlist the facts in detail, claiming how each of the 4 servants had somehow been distracted one way or another at the moment of Drebber's assassination. In such a way, none of them managed to get a clear view of the killer and have no idea how the events unfolded. In the meantime, John inspects Drebber's wounds, realizing how the target was shot 4 times at point-blank range. From this, the detective confirms how the killer himself was an amateur, since he wasted 4 bullets instead of going straight for the heart or spilling the target's brains out with a single fire. That said, someone must definitely be pulling the strings from behind the scenes, since the amateur himself couldn't possibly possess the wisdom to handcraft such a delicate scheme. As for Sherlock, the detective goes straight to investigating his name written in blood. He then draws the conclusion about his name being calligraphed by the killer instead of Drebber himself. His logic is quite simple. The letters forming his name are too thick for Drebber's delicate fingers. That said, the killer must definitely be a man of superior build. Before being taken away, Sherlock manages to slip a secret note into John's hands. Far away, William is seen conversing with Jefferson, a guy who had a bone to pick with the deceased Drebber, and was thus handpicked as the ideal killer by William himself. Through such a delicate trap, William was also able to gauge the scope of Sherlock's deduction abilities and guess whether he was a threat to their cause or not. Episode 9. Upon leaving Drebber's mansion, Lestrade colludes with Sherlock to help him escape and investigate the case separately. The detective then meets with John at the place he designated in the secret hand note from before. Once there, Sherlock reveals the wedding ring he discovered and snuck into his pocket back in Drebber's mansion. He charges John with the task of publishing an ad regarding the missing ring, hoping the criminal will take the bait. On the flip side, Jefferson is seen pleading with Fred to help him rediscover the ring. Apparently, it's the last remaining memento from his deceased wife, Lucy, and is therefore very precious to him. In the end, William decides to go for it despite knowing it's a trap. Sometime later, an old hag comes looking for the ring, claiming how it belongs to her daughter, Lucy. John hands over the ring without too much of a fuss, and the detective starts trailing the woman soon afterwards. Then, after turning a corner, the woman disappears abruptly. Sherlock realizes how the target is far too agile for an old woman. Luckily, he's able to follow in the woman's footsteps and intercepts her in due time. The two end up exchanging a couple of blows, until Sherlock manages to blow away half of the target's mask, revealing how it's Fred disguised as an old woman. Unfortunately, dear old Freddy manages to slip past Sherlock's grasp and rushes off into the distance. Later on, John is feeling distressed since they lost the ring, the only lead they had to solve the murder case. Sherlock's next words astonish him just then, since the detective claims to have already discovered who the killer was. Turns out he had Lestrade take a peek into Drebber's past, sniffing for clues. As a result, they learned how the dead aristocrat had previously molested a ton of females from the lower class. One such victim happened to be Jefferson's wife, Lucy. The poor girl's badly bruised corpse had been delivered to Jefferson after being raped a number of times by the wretched Drebber himself. Sherlock further claims how the man driving their carriage at present is in fact the killer himself. Upon being questioned by John, Sherlock reveals how he discovered tracks of a smaller car, such as this one, outside Drebber's mansion. Since the killer obviously won't have any drivers serving as witnesses by dropping him off to Drebber's place, there's only one conclusion to be drawn here. The killer happens to be the driver himself. From there, he simply bribed a bunch of stray kids into hunting down a carriage owner who matches the killer's profile. Back in the present, the detective confronts Jefferson head-on and offers him a deal. Turns out the guy is terminally ill and had only been alive for the purpose of revenge. Now, he wishes for nothing more than to end his miserable existence. What's more, by granting his wish for death, Sherlock shall learn the identity of the scheme's mastermind by Fred, who stands watching some distance away. Furthermore, an excellent testimony will also appear and help Sherlock reclaim his innocence back in court, should he proceed to kill Jefferson. Jefferson further claims how his benefactor happens to be a prodigy at crimes, and for reasons unknown, he holds Sherlock Holmes in high esteem. In fact, that's the very reason he orchestrated this entire plot and framed Sherlock with Drebber's killer, all so he could test out his opponent's limits. For a moment there, John starts doubting his comrade and worries that he'll take up Jefferson on his offer. His concerns prove futile, though, as Sherlock simply shoots at Jefferson's legs, sparing his life. He then claims how it's pointless to have others reveal the mastermind's identity. After all, where's the fun in having others solve the mystery for you? As a result, Jefferson ends up in prison, with Sherlock regaining his freedom after all. Far away, William reveals how the whole Kill Jefferson act was to test whether Sherlock will resort to any means necessary to fulfill his goals or not. In the end, he still declares the detective as a worthy opponent, and comments about Sherlock being the only one who shall solve the incoming crimes they stage in London. Episode 10. Meanwhile, Sherlock's fame skyrockets after having almost single-handedly solved Drebber's murder case. As a result, his schedule starts teeming with new cases, each of which he manages to resolve with the grace of an expert. Even so, still, Sherlock isn't satisfied, since it's neither fame nor wealth that he's after. In fact, any more of these mundane cases, and this poor fellow might as well commit suicide from boredom. Instead, what he's really after are intriguing mysteries, such as what happened to Enders on board the cruise liner, as well as Drebber's murder case. What's more, Sherlock can't help but mull over the identity of Jefferson's mysterious benefactor, whom we know is William in reality. All in all, the guy starts wondering whether denying Jefferson's wish for death, and as a result ruining his chance to meet the mastermind, was the right course of action after all. Becoming frustrated, Sherlock starts blaming John for forbidding him from killing Jefferson. Meanwhile, John feels utterly disappointed after realizing how his roommate could indeed have been killed unlawfully. Later on, as they're traveling in a train, Sherlock coincidentally bumps into William and Lewis while they're busy munching on food. The glum detective's mood instantly lightens all of a sudden, and he starts to blubber nonstop in front of the duo. Sherlock proposes how there might be a criminal mastermind manipulating both Enders as well as Drebber's case. Furthermore, he bluffs about how he denied Jefferson's offer to reveal the mastermind's name, but later decided against it and paid Drebber's killer a visit back in jail. Upon being questioned, Jefferson disclosed his benefactor's name as none other than William James Moriarty. While Sherlock's busy shooting arrows in the dark and pulling off his biggest bluff yet, Lewis recognizes him for the crook that he truly is. Turns out, they had been keeping a constant watch on Jefferson. Hence, Lewis knew that none had visited Jefferson so far. However, William is now a conundrum, since denying the accusation means admitting his involvement with Jefferson's case. Feeling perplexed, Lewis sneakily grabs hold of his knife and prepares to strike, in case Sherlock's truly dead serious. However, William then declares how it's next to impossible to prove his innocence in such circumstances. Furthermore, he points out how it's Sherlock's duty to prove him as guilty. William then imitates Sherlock's posture, and with a cocky expression on his face, he challenges Sherlock to catch him if he can. For a moment there, the detective truly starts visualizing William as the mastermind. William pours cold water on his expectations the very next instant, though, claiming how his prior statement was but a mere joke. Even so, Sherlock can't help but feel adrenaline rushing through his veins after making the acquaintance of Moriarty. The detective's fairly certain how they both will get along famously well together. A while later, Lestrade shows up and Sherlock introduces him to the Moriarty brothers. Just then, a woman's scream catches their attention. Upon visiting the neighboring compartment, they discover the woman pointing at a dead body, one she just discovered recently. Sherlock takes it as an opportunity to compete against Moriarty. As a result, he challenges William to a duel. Simply put, the first one to resolve the murder mystery shall be deemed as the winner. William accepts, but then points at John, who makes an entrance just then. Even Sherlock is caught off guard after witnessing his roommate appear out of the blue, with clothes entrenched in fresh blood and a ghastly expression on his face. This wraps up the episode's end, and we're left pondering several mysteries. How the hell is John involved with the present murder situation? Furthermore, is William the one pulling the strings in the dark, or some other foe? Last but not least, who will win the duel between the mighty detective Sherlock and the ingenious crime consultant Moriarty? We'll find out in the next couple of episodes of Moriarty the Patriot. And in case you're a subscriber with notifications enabled, you'll learn the answers as well.